welcome to the WhatCulture Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Tailford, joined by Ewan Patterson.
Hello, hello, hello.
And Josh Brown.
Hello, hello, hello.
And although this news kind of broke last week as to all sorts of EA gubbins and shenanigans, what?
He did my thing.
Just laughing at the state of EA.
We had a little bit of a moment. It's okay. You didn't have to be there.
So, well, I am here. Yeah. That's the only place where I am. But not to worry. So yeah, we basically just had a bit of a natter in the office and just thought, you know what? EA's treatment of the Star Wars IP has not been the best of times.
Definitely not eBay.
It's not, and I will not stand for such puns. I think you have to do a lot better. But we thought we might as well go back through the timeline and just kind of like pick apart when did this happen, how did we get here, and all sorts of things around that subject matter. So I've assembled a big old timeline starting from May 2013, which is when EA first signed the deal, 10-year deal with Disney, and Frank Gibeau, I can't remember what his name is, G-I-B-E-A-U.
G.I. Joe?
G.I. Joe himself referred to this as a dream deal back in 2013. So they were going to sign a 10-year deal. They did sign a 10-year deal. And he said, DICE and Visceral will produce new games, joining the BioWare team, which continues to develop for the Star Wars franchise. Now, BioWare is obviously the Star Wars, the Old Republic stuff, which continued forward. DICE and Visceral, though, that's a bit of a thing.
That's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
But even as like an opening gambit, like retrospectively, obviously only DICE survived that.
Yeah.
But I missed this at the time, but he outlined Visceral only to walk it back.
As someone who absolutely adored LucasArts, like top to bottom, like I even try my best now to keep up with what those former developers are working on. That's why I was so happy about or excited about Mafia 3, because it was done by Hayden Blackman and a bunch of other ex-LucasArts devs. I was really upset when they got binned, and I still kind of think it was a needless decision that Disney made. You know, they were already planning to do a Star Wars Episode 7 game when Disney announced that. And then when it moved to EA, I was like, oh God, I love DICE, but... And then when they had that announcement, I was like, you know what? I'm fully on board with this. If they can, like, generate enough passion into these studios, because EA, we've already known that EA have great studios. The studios have never been the issue. It's always been the publisher. And then during that time when they were given the Star Wars license, they were kind of having a little bit of a goodwill period. Like they were starting to come back with original IPs like Titanfall, and obviously.
Well, I mean, that's a really...
It didn't last.
Like, that's a promising press release in a way. You've got BioWare back in Star Wars. I know they never really left, but that sort of invites the possibility of Knights of the Old Republic 3, like a proper sequel. You've got Visceral, who obviously had just got Uncharted and Naughty Dog's Amy Hennig at the time.
Well, Josh Brown, we're going to tackle this month by month, year by year. So, so this announcement happened in 2013, and that was when Visceral started Project Yuma, which is a pirate-themed Star Wars open-world game, which they've barely talked about, barely even knew existed. Amy Hennig actually joined Visceral in 2014, and apparently it was on her that said, "I don't want to work on an open-world game that can just be any old other open-world thing. I want to do something more, linear," which is why Project Ragtag got off the ground.
God, I remember doing these rumors. I remember because for a while we thought it was a Han Solo game that was going to be open world.
You did.
Well, no, that was the thing that came out, and we had Todd Stashwick.
Yes, actually,
he was meant to be involved in writing one of these games as well. And I can't remember if it was Ragtag or Yuma, but.
Nearly everything seemed to be relating around Ragtag, and then we found out about like basically it was going to be that Amy Hennig was essentially going to herald Star Wars Uncharted, which anyone who remembers the Star Wars 1313 stuff, which I think was shown off when it was still just LucasArts. I think LucasArts showed that off initially. Seemed like, and that itself, if you look at the footage, it again has very Uncharted vibes, and just looked to be the best thing possible. Which obviously didn't really last. Also in 2013, Battlefront was announced. The whole reboot of Battlefront, reboot of Battlefront. Hate a beer. But even that, I mean, I remember when that was first announced, and a lot of people were just kind of like, really? Like, obviously, pandemic have shut down, but we're just going to wipe the slate and try again.
I was very excited about that game, and when it came out, I enjoyed it a lot.
Okay.
Sorry, but even though it was sparse in content, I thought it was it definitely had flaws and stuff, but in terms of what it gave us, which was literally meant to be Battlefield, but with Star Wars, it wasn't on the same level, and I think that's because they started development in, 2014, and it was out in 2015? Late 2013?
It was a quick turnaround.
Yeah, it was very quick. But it set the ground up for what should have been the perfect sequel.
We'll get to that. Let's talk a little bit more about what Battlefront was like, because November 2015 is when that dropped, and obviously there was the whole mixed reception, the whole no campaign, no single player, and I remember that being revealed as a big deal. Like, everyone kind of thought that with the might of EA and the fact you've got DICE, who've done single player campaigns and stuff before very well, or at least visually very well.
Bad Company campaigns were good.
Yeah, Bad Company was great. I mean, I was just thinking of the Battlefield Hardline, which didn't land very well.
But either way, then that was visceral.
I forgot that game even existed.
I guess because it's Battlefield, I'm thinking it's DICE. But still, like that first Battlefront landed, and it was just kind of, it was fine. It was so aggressively fine. And I remember like it was out in time with The Force Awakens. And I remember thinking at the time, I really want to play some Force Awakens stuff. And the only answer to that was the Lego Force Awakens game.
The Battle of Jakku DLC.
That's not a thing. That happened before the movie. I want to play as Rey. I want to play as Finn.
Battlefront was a really strange one for me because obviously when that gets announced, I was a fan of the original. I'm a big fan of DICE. I love Battlefield. What I wanted was Battlefield, but in the Star Wars universe. Yes. I wanted the complexity of that, complexity and the scale of those multiplayer fights, which I don't think you quite got. It was very obvious that EA wanted to go down a more casual market, which is fine. They wanted to attract as many Star Wars fans as possible, but I think that did come at the expense of content. And I think when you look back on it now, you can easily see that coming. When the game was first shown off, EA just show off games in a really weird way. They reveal them really strangely. When the first glimpse that we got of that game was concept art and the developers working on it. We didn't see like a trailer. It was just sort of work in progress footage. And this was like a year before it came out, which left you wondering, how are they going to turn this around and make it good? And they did make it good in my opinion, but it wasn't what I wanted it to be.
I completely agree. I think you raised a valid point there. Mechanically, it was nowhere near as nuanced or as deep as Battlefield, and that definitely hurt gameplay. Like you had, instead of having a squad system where you could team with different people, and like you had to think about like destruction and objectives and like the way you use land and what weapon you should be using. They just kind of gave everyone like a hodgepodge of different weapons, and then just the star cards and the power ups, and it just wasn't what I was expecting. But I enjoyed it because I thought the graphical fidelity and like the way it handled it played superbly for what it was. Yeah, but it just wasn't what I wanted.
I remember like, you could tell like the budgetary side of it. Like I remember that Hoth beta. I forgot how that came out. If it was you could just opt in or whatever. But I remember the first time I played the Hoth level and like just Walker Assault and just walking in amongst the feet of the AT-ATs and like all the sound effects are ringing off and you just the actual like I don't know like visual or like budgetary oomph that game had was phenomenal. I remember loving that first half an hour, and then just from there it just kind of didn't have a whole lot else to offer. And I remember a whole bunch of my mates just weren't bothered because there wasn't anything to write home about in terms of single player stuff. And obviously their answer was like, well, you can go do the wave based stuff, which is like whatever. Did you guys spend much time doing that?
Non-answer. It was all right. It was fine. It was another mode in a game full of modes.
It's for me. It's part of the mode. For me, it's part of the wider conversation in terms of them just not hitting the mark as well as they could have done. Only in that particular context or whatever, you had Force Awakens, the Return of Star Wars. Where am I going to go to play the Return of Star Wars? And you're not. You're going to play the original trilogy.
That was the thing, right? I mean, they signed this deal in 2013. We get Battlefront in 2015. That was realistically the only thing that you could turn around at that time. Like creating a game from scratch. I don't know. When people make a new IP, it usually takes about 4 years. So to get that game out at all without a single player campaign is quite impressive. And I don't know what else they could have done in that time, but still.
But that's another thing. It's worth pointing out as well that the sheer look of Battlefront, there's a technique that DICE use called photogrammetry. I'm just mentioning this because I'm a huge nerd and I love this. They basically take a whole million load of photos of any item, and they had full access to all the props and stuff on the movies and stuff. They basically take a whole bunch of photos and they recreate it in the game. That's how it looks, kind of photoreal. But they did release the Rogue One DLC, which had the landing pad and all the stuff, the set design that would then be in Rogue One.
That was a great DLC now that you mentioned it, because you could get in a little gunner seat and like basically have your Star Wars Vietnam moment, which is pretty cool.
So they released like after the launch date, but mostly in time with Rogue One. And I guess maybe the extra few months afforded them the time to release that stuff. But I remember thinking that they could have had something for Force Awakens, and it just felt like they missed the boat on that.
That's really interesting. I'm going to kind of skip ahead for a second, but Battlefront 2, that had loads of stuff that tied into the Force Awakens, and they tried to make it tenuous by saying, oh, there's this little map that Luke Skywalker has that may come into, and it's literally in one scene of The Last Jedi. It has no value whatsoever.
Nope.
But that was what people wanted the first time around. So by the time they got it in Battlefront 2, and it kind of already followed. So even though I enjoy the character of Iden there was certain elements to that story that I think we all found to be a little bit cliched.
Oh yeah, we'll get to Battlefront 2. I think it's worth pointing out as well, which I was looking up because there's a whole bunch of Star Wars mobile games, but if you actually drill down to the ones that EA like really had a hand in or whatever, they've only really got two. One of them is Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, which is the card collecting one that actually released in November alongside Battlefront, which I don't know if you guys have played Galaxy of Heroes.
No.
You've heard of it. I've not played Galaxy of Heroes. I've played the other one that I'll get to, but it kind of speaks to their, like, if you go down the whole, you cartoonify EA and assume they're the big evil corporate overlords who just want to make as much money as possible with as little little amount of effort as possible, then doing a card collecting app is a way to do
like
that.
Simpsons Tapped Out.
Yes, I haven't played that.
That's the exact same.
Is it not good?
Well, it's not the same game, but it's the same principle.
Same
that they
approach.
have the Simpsons license, so they could just have Tapped Out, which makes millions every year. So
because that's the thing, as an overarching statement, like EA have signed a deal in 2013 for 10 years, and looking back on them now, they've released 2 AAA games and 2 mobile games, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so one of those mobile games is Galaxy of Heroes, which people sort of know the name of, but it didn't exactly make any splash or anything. It didn't do it particularly well. And so if you go forward from there to 2016, that's when Battlefront 2 gets announced, and it says, hey, we're gonna have the campaign and the story focus and everything that we missed out on the last one, that's going to be in the new one. And then obviously when you think about Battlefront 2, that stuff was just so marred.
Frustrating, because when they came out and announced it and they were saying, well, we don't have a season pass anymore, all the DLC is going to be free, we're going to have a single player campaign, look, we're really focused on it, he's the star to talk you through it and be really excited for it. They got every bit of messaging right until they didn't and completely fumbled it.
I think actually let's save the diving headfirst into Battlefront until I get to that point, because the next thing is another mobile game, which is the one that I have actually played quite a lot of. It's Star Wars Force Arena, that came out in January 2017.
Did not know that
I don't think that many
existed.
people did. I was randomly Googling Star Wars games a while back, and I happened to find it. It's literally them doing their version of Clash Royale, which if you've not played Clash Royale, it's basically a deck of cards style thing. You have a meter burn, each card costs a certain amount of that meter, and you play your cards down, and it's a tower defense thing. And so it's really good though. You can play a Luke Skywalker card, and you can go and fight Grievous. And then you pay for the Darth Maul.
You know what I'd rather have? I'd rather they made. What would have been really clever was if they made the chess game that Chewie constantly gets pissed off at.
I think you can get that now.
That would make so much more sense as a mobile game. If you just have something that ties in the Star Wars, just do that. And then if you play it, you get extra points for your Battlefront currency packs or whatever they are. I don't know.
As an overall sentiment though towards mobile Star Wars offerings, are they just like a meh for you guys? Because I'm mostly meh too.
Just not for me. I just don't play mobile games much, and it's the Star Wars license isn't going to do much to bring me in. Even if they are good, like
it's fine.
The only thing that could ever compel me to play one of these mobile games was if I got benefits playing the big boy game. That's really patronising. I'm sorry, but if I got like points to use on that, then potentially I would just fanny around while I'm on the loo, just going play card. Yeah.
I do think it's worth pointing out for me and the 7 other Force Arena fans, how ridiculous is it that you've got to pretend that you're fighting real players and it's actually AI for the first bunch of rounds?
That's awkward.
It's bad. I mean, it's to make you feel, I'm really good at this. I'm doing really well. And you're not. It turns out you've been fighting AI for the last few hours. But not to worry. So later in 2017 was when things started to fall the F apart. October 2017, Visceral shut down and Project Ragtag was cancelled, which was one of the most public shutting downs of a studio we've ever seen.
God damn it, that was disappointing. I remember the day. It was horrible. Was I in here when that happened?
Probably. We would have covered it regardless.
We did cover it.
But the end of 2017 is where things go notably sour, because obviously you've got the build-up from the first Battlefront being mildly disappointing, or whatever, it's mixed. Like, obviously the mechanics are solid, but it's not what people wanted necessarily. You've got the mobile games out there. Everyone was kind of like, what the hell? And you've built up Battlefront 2, and then you can the story-focused game, which loses Amy Hennig. And I think she left, or at least her contract was in dispute immediately after that. So yeah, Visceral shut down in October, Ragtag is cancelled. How did you guys take that, considering that they announced that back in 2013?
The concept art for it looked lush. Like, it looked so cool. And even the stuff that we've seen come out recently as well, like the Ragtag band of rebels they had. See what I did there? That looked really cool as well. And there was obviously there is so much talent at these studios.
Yes.
And clearly they are all capable of making a brilliant Star Wars game. But for some reason or another, it's like we're back in 2008 when LucasArts were having the dark years where everything was getting cancelled and stuff wasn't getting past the conceptual stage of development. And it was really gutting, because we had Battlefront 2 at the same time. It was almost like just like the perfect storm was brewing.
That's the
so
thing.
frustrating.
Like, talk a bit more about Visceral, but I didn't realize, like, only when looking back did I realize that they were only a month apart. Like, Visceral fell apart in October. They were shuttered in October, and then Battlefront 2 was out in November.
Right.
And it's just like that 1-2 punch is kind of all you needed to make people go, actually, screw this whole thing.
It takes the wind out of you, doesn't it, really?
But in terms of the Visceral thing, if you read Kotaku's report, it seems like they really struggled to sort of have like a unified vision as to what they were supposed to be working on. Like, they had the open world pirate game, Project Yuma, and then they had Project Ragtag, which was Amy Hennig's thing. And you can read into how the various team members didn't seem to actually coalesce very well.
Yes, I do remember that.
Hennig seems like a hell of a creative force, but she maybe wasn't as good at, I don't know, getting their vision across to the team as she could have been. And so either way, it didn't seem to come together. Apparently, a source referred to Visceral being shut down as a mercy killing, which is a hell of a way to put it.
Like of mice and men.
A little bit, yes.
At the time, it seemed so surprising, but when you look back on it, like Visceral had done the Dead Space series and that had underperformed, and then they'd been moved on to Battlefield Hardline and that underperformed, and then they couldn't get this together. So the writing was on the wall, but it didn't make it any less
and especially because that was one of the only games that we'd actually seen a little bit of footage of, like the whole thing. I feel you called the main guy, I think he's called like Sixer or something like that, or Dasher or something. Anyway, I think he's called Dash, whatever.
It's a reindeer, isn't it?
It might be.
There was an old Star Wars character called Dash Rendar.
Dash Rendar. It's not him.
No.
Anyway, they showed a little bit off of a guy stepping out of one of the cantinas on Tatooine, and that seemed to be at least promising. But yeah, so that moves us on to Battlefront 2, which is like, besides the fact of the game, which I totally think Battlefront 2 plays extremely well. I had a lot of fun with it online.
Yes.
But you have to analyze the wider context around it. All the loot box stuff kicked off because of Battlefront 2.
Yeah.
Which was massive.
It's interesting to note now that the game's kind of experiencing a mini resurgence. They had there was a massive kind of campaign from fans to incorporate Clone Wars content, and they've really doubled down on that. So right now they've got like a whole Geonosis thing. They're bringing loads of cool skins back. So at the end of the day, Battlefront 2 had a lot of cool ideas about it.
Yeah.
But it just seems as though it was a victim of the culture that it kind of was made in, because this is when loot boxes were really, really coming out. And obviously we'd had Overwatch, which was so successful with them, but then it predicated its entire progression system around the randomness of these things. And obviously if you play multiplayer FPSs and competitive shooters a lot, you'll know that the basic premise is the more time you put into a certain class, the more you will unlock of that class. That's how it makes sense. And I get maybe there was an argument to be said that it encourages you to explore different classes. That just did not translate, and it was completely overshadowed by the fact that you had to get these crystals to even unlock characters like Luke Skywalker.
Well, that's the crux of it, because obviously the whole thing with implementing any loot box system is the idea of pay to win. And so like with Battlefront 2, and you had the star card system returning again, they had literal like percentage based buffs or whatever, like damage boost, grenade blast radiuses, things like that you could get by paying money to unlock more boxes. That was the crux of why people went, actually this is too much, because someone with more money than me can pay to beat me. And that just sucked.
I think it is telling that they did try to strip some of that off before it launched. There were a couple of things that they did try to like tone down, and like it wasn't as bad as it was in pre-release when it first came out. But the damage by then was already done. Well, it didn't really matter.
That's the thing. It blew up so much that I remember that they pulled the loot box store from. They made it so they didn't affect the rest of the game. They just pulled the ability to buy anything. So all of a sudden the progression just missed something. But that was within the first month. They removed the ability to purchase loot boxes within the first month. So they were in immediate damage control because of how ridiculous and
Well, it was the price of the heroes was the big thing for me when that was like just ridiculous
like
to
60,000.
To unlock characters that you already had in Battlefront 1. But thankfully that was one of the
earliest things they changed.
Yeah, that was like day one potentially, I think. So that was fine, but it was just to see them in damage control, which did impact the rollout of the content. Like we're getting great stuff now, but it's taken them months to get to the position where they fixed what should have been fixed.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, to drop something else in, it would take until April 2018 for them to release the cosmetic store, and that was after their like really weird PR messaging where they said like people don't want alternate skins and stuff. And the example given was that people wouldn't want a bright pink Darth Vader.
Which is stupid, because all people wanted to do was customize their own soldiers.
Yeah,
it was so weird, because the DICE, fair play to them, they were very vocal throughout the entire. Like, they've not given up on the game at all. And hopefully maybe if they continue to support it, it could almost take on a siege mentality, the good kind. But it's a shame, because there is evidently, again, like I was saying, there is so much talent in these studios, but it seems as though they've been completely hampered by stuff they cannot control. And it's at that point we have to figure out, is this an issue with EA? Or is this just something to do with the Star Wars brand? Because, the Star Wars cancellations of video games aren't exclusive to EA.
No.
LucasArts, even though we were all excited about 1313, they cancelled great ideas that were barely in the most conceptual stage of development. There's a really good expose that Game Informer did a few years back, where they go into the development issues and they say, we did concept art for Knights of the Old Republic 3. Don't know why it got canned. just did. And it's like, is this just people being intimidated by the license, or do we just need to give it to someone else? I don't know.
Yeah, I think, like the thing that Josh was saying, like they potentially show things off way too early and they don't really have enough projects locked in, because LucasArts don't have that reputation, whereas EA are pretty much known as like an axe murderer at this point. It's just like anything, if you're joining up with them, chances are
There's the thumbnail.
the sword of Damocles is above you from like day one. I mean, what do you guys think in terms of like the way that they've treated the IP?
I mean, they've not done well, have they?
No.
I remember reading a thing, I think I've talked to you guys about this before, where apparently it's not as lucrative as you think it would be, the deal between EA and Star Wars. Apparently they aren't getting like the most money out of it.
I remember,
they're trying to like make the most of it, but in the worst possible way, not really giving Star Wars fans what they want, and sort of having a really specific idea of what video games are, like what's in the in vogue thing at the moment, and trying to cram Star Wars into that rather than letting it breathe.
I mean, I think in terms of like that's the thing. You look at like this, because the details of their deal specifically aren't online. But like little random scuttlebutt stuff on forums, rumors, whatever, seems to point to the idea that EA settled on the exclusivity part, the exclusivity clause or whatever, as opposed to something that is better in terms of like a revenue basis. It seems like they thought, well, if we can get Star Wars at all, if we can lock this thing down, then we're pretty much set.
There seems to be one big fundamental error with their plan there. In order to get the most out of making money from Star Wars, you actually have to make videos.
They actually made some games, wouldn't it? So something else as well. I mean, we can always go back to Battlefront 2, because I mean, actually, in terms of the wider context, this was the thing that set in motion the wider conversation as to the legality of loot boxes. And it was I forget what you call the guy, one of Hawaii's state representatives was the person who called it a Star Wars themed online casino, a gambling casino for kids.
That sounds awesome, not gonna lie. That's a Mos Eisley Cantina.
Only if you know how much you're investing. And no, because you'd be underage regardless.
No, I'd be walking in and they'd be there like, we don't like you, and I'd be there like, I don't like you either.
And you just get on down to it with your fancy die.
I've got the death sentence in 12 systems.
But yeah, so that was the whole thing, and that's what affected the way that loot boxes are referred to. I mean, somewhere like China discloses the drop rates of loot boxes now. It's like a legal requirement. Belgium's laws changed because of it, but all that came because of Battlefront. And apparently it was Bob Iger from Disney who apparently rang EA. This is what resulted in them pulling the microtransaction store. Because apparently Iger rang and just said, "This is the worst thing." I mean, I'm obviously
for some odd reason I find that a little bit hard to buy. Bob Iger, Disney guy, it's like, stop making money. I don't see that happening, but it is interesting to contemplate whether Disney are satisfied with their use.
But that's like a weird PR move, because they would have signed off on the game every step of the way. Like when I had the pleasure of interviewing Mitch Dyer, the writer for Battlefront 2, like awesome, he was saying that he's a great guy. They were saying that he was saying that they bounce every idea off their higher ups. Everything goes back and forward. Obviously, the Star Wars IP needs to be handled in a very specific way. So Disney would have been fully aware of what was going on.
They would be working with Lucasfilm Story Group on this. So,
and then it's like, well, then they have to then look good to the people. So they then go, oh, this is public phone call where actually we stopped him taking advantage of the Star Wars IP. It's like, yeah, whatever. So that takes us into 2018. June 2018 is when I was going to say we saw Jedi Fallen Order, but we didn't see it. We saw Vince Zampella in the studio.
We're announcing a new game
in the audience. That's got to be hands down the weirdest way to ever announce a game.
Yeah, I think so.
Man in audience says thing.
What else was even at that conference? Because I remember so much of that E3, and literally my one takeaway from EA's conference is they sat down with the Respawn guys, like, oh, what you working on?
Yeah.
Star Wars. Cool. Next. And then that was literally it.
Why are EA so bad at E3? They're always bad. Every single year they're showing is potentially
They've got half the title already, E. Why can't they get the 3-part right?
The thing they never seem to realize is they dedicate so much time to the sports side of stuff, and the people who watch E3 don't care about sports games.
Sells already, you don't need that at E3.
Like that would be the prime time if they don't have any gameplay to show to do the whole making of stuff and try to remind people that they are invested in the IP, they are invested in the brand, and do that. I mean, they did show that for Jedi Fallen Order, but that was like months beforehand. By the time we sat down with Vince Zampella in the audience,
wasn't that literally just a 30-second clip of some guys swinging some lightsabers together?
Yeah. This is the same show when they showed off Anthem and they were like, right, okay, we've got the developers, they're going to sit on a couch while some footage of someone flying flies around behind. Well, you can talk about it. It was just the worst messaging ever. I don't know why they keep doing it. I'm fuming, guys. It
was very much like, it was like sort of like, oh, this is your thing, you care about this, you go sell it, you go do it. But it's like they must have had something to show off. I mean, right now, if we ever cover Jedi Fallen Order on the website, we haven't done any videos specifically on it, but there's nothing. There's no concept art. There's nothing. The only thing that we use is a rumored image that is just of a man holding a lightsaber.
And it is scheduled to release in 2019. Like, even after Jason Schreier's recent report, because we did the new story on Vancouver's cancelled game last week.
Yes.
He still maintains that Fallen Order is meant to come out at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And that could still happen. You know, we're in an age at the moment where people announce games and then 5 months later they're like cleared for release. So I mean, I want to see some footage of that soon, because if it's anything remotely similar to the Jedi Knight games of old, I will be very happy.
I'd be very in. And plus, with it being Respawn, it should control extremely well. I think that's kind of the thing, like, going forward, because obviously Sony pulled out of E3, so that we're looking for big announcements kind of thing. It could be their time to just drop some gameplay footage and let it build up its own momentum. And one of the best ways to avoid the double-edged sword of hype is to do the Rockstar or the Bethesda thing and just go, hey, it's real and it's out in like 2 months or whatever. So maybe that's what they're doing, considering everything else.
Again, it's another game built on promise. I love Respawn. I love all the people who work there. They've made some great games. They made great games.
Titanfall 2 is the best shooter of all time.
Apparently,
it's
shouting madness now.
Yeah, it's just
Titanfall 2 is potentially the greatest shooter of all time.
Thanks,
apparently, Titanfall 3 is also coming out this year, so that scares me a little bit. Yeah, this has been rumored for a while.
What year is it?
I think it was at a press conference. Someone from EA spokesperson said that they'll have two. Well,
I know they said the franchise will continue.
Respawn games coming out in 2019,
okay.
which implies two. And apparently it's been rumored to be Titanfall 3 and Jedi Fallen Order.
So
which scares me, because why would they split the teams to work on?
And also, it's going to literally do the same thing that happened to Titanfall 2. It's like, okay, Titanfall 2, we want this IP to be really good. Why don't we shove Battlefield 1 right out next to it? It's like, oh, you want Titanfall 3, do you? Oh, let's put Star Wars right next to it and watch that bomb too.
If they do that again and they put out Titanfall 3 right next to Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, there's no reality where that needs to happen again.
It's kind of promising though, because to me that indicates that they are two completely different games. When you think about Respawn and what they do well, you think multiplayer shooters, online focus. If they're releasing both these games within the same year, that to me implies that one of them is going to be the big multiplayer shooter, and something can be done differently with Fallen Order.
The only thing that goes against that is that the reason that EA weren't so hot on Ragtag, again, if you read the Kotaku thing, it was literally Visceral presenting ideas to like the board or whatever, and they just said, well, how are you going to make, if FIFA makes us, literally they were saying, FIFA makes us X hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, where's your Ultimate Team?
Build your Star Wars Ultimate Team.
Yeah, it was like, where's your version of that? And so, like, that's the thing. If their company mandate is the biggest games ever, then an assumedly smaller tier, more linear, Respawn-focused single-player story thing it's never going to be that.
True, but I imagine it's definitely going to have multiplayer. Like, you don't get a Respawn game and not have a great multiplayer suite. But I think you might be able to get something different within the single-player campaign. Potentially. What was interesting to me is when Visceral tanked and you got like the Kotaku report out of it, the comments from inside EA were that although they had been working on it for a less amount of time, the Respawn game looked better than where Visceral's was. Apparently Visceral had a couple of years on it, and Respawn had like a much shorter amount of time, but theirs looked more promising to EA anyway. Which
that's the thing. I mean,
kind of cool.
Yeah, it's like Visceral seemed to really suffer from like just they had a couple of different ideas, and then it was like trying to have a unified vision. That the creative side really seems to just time passed and nothing had come forward. So like hence the whole mercy killing type thing. The last thing I've got down here is looking to the future, which is from just this month. It's probably the same Kotaku report that you mentioned, saying that a smaller game is apparently coming, but it's meant to be lined up with next gen consoles.
Is this the one that Motive are involved in, or am I getting my wires crossed?
I think I had EA. Yeah. Well, I've got EA Vancouver down for it, but either way, it's meant to be a smaller Star Wars game, and apparently it's scheduled for 2020, and that's meant to be when the next systems are coming.
I think Motive are probably involved in that one as well, because they're doing all like the vehicle mechanics. So maybe it's like a small, because the one that was cancelled last week, which was Project Orca, I think it was called Project Orca. I remember my own work that I did last week. That was canon. That was going to be an open world game,
right? That might be what you turned into.
Yeah, and then Motive kind of they've already handled loads of the vehicle mechanics and stuff like Battlefront. So potentially that's their involvement there. What if this 2020 game is going to be like a small story-driven narrative piece of content? That would be pretty interesting. It's a case of even if it ever gets made, if it does.
It's weird because like EA used to be like their whole multiplayer focus, microtransactions, loot boxes, loot grinds, all that stuff. They seem to be right on the money in terms of how much money those games were making. And it was like, okay, if you were from a completely corporate business mentality, why would you ever do anything other than this? And then we had God of War, Spidey, Red Dead Redemption 2, and the resurgence, quote unquote, of the single player game. I would always argue that it never went away. But you have all these, it's a year loaded where the best games are these diehard single player experiences. Maybe on the business side now, the EA side, they can crunch that and go, actually, let's just delay for a year and do something with a good reputation and something that is story focused. If stories have become as profitable as EA need them to be, then we're in a very good position.
This is the thing. I remember seeing, I think it was last week, the highest grossing games of last year, including like microtransactions and base sales. In FIFA 18 was up there with a ridiculous amount, like almost $1 billion.
Ultimate Team is insane.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know, and I don't think I saw any single player games on there that wasn't Red Dead Redemption 2 that broke into the top 10 or the
GTA
top 20. Probably, but again, that's
GTA Online. But then even Red Dead Online.
Yeah. So I don't know if EA have sort of come around. I'm sure they're thinking about it. I'm sure they're thinking we can't go on continuing to annoy people and treat the Star Wars license like this because it's not making us any money. But I don't know if they're going to kind of whole game to make it the smallest single player thing.
Honestly,
I can't see it happening.
It could be a case of where in a few years' time we get to an EA that is literally like Activision, where they have two IPs that they know are trusted and they just don't care about anything else. And it'll be FIFA and Battlefield.
Well,
and that'll be and there are other sports games as well, like Madden and NBA and stuff.
People like that whole thing. It's like you look to them as a studio, as a team, and the top brass ones, the Andrew Wilsons of the world kind of thing. Like they're not in the gaming industry for what I would say are the right reasons. They're only looking to make money, nickel and dime people, create all these microtransaction grinds, and it makes it's incredibly good business. But you're in a creative medium, obviously there has to be a balance. But you look at the way that their systems roll out, and it's like that's the thing. If all they want is money, then it makes more sense for them to drill down to the most money hungry franchises like FIFA and just focus on them.
That's the interesting what you said there, Ewan, because there's an incongruity with what EA do and the way they present themselves. Activision, I think, are a far worse developer when it comes to sort of monetization and trying to make the most money and cancel
Black Ops, sneaking them all in.
Yeah. But because Activision don't sort of have a public face, really, they're just Activision. We know who the CEO is. They're essentially Shadow Council. They don't do EA press conferences. They just give other people their games. They don't have that public figure that EA does. EA has people who work for them that sort of come out and try to sell you on this stuff, whereas Activision just does it. And I think that's a weird distinction between the two. And I hope EA doesn't go the Activision route.
It's weird. We might do that as a separate podcast because that's the thing. How much does the optics of it affect who we direct our ire at? Because you've got EA get dragged through the mud on a daily basis, whereas Activision occasionally do. But Warner Brothers have made some ridiculous paid for fatalities in Mortal Kombat. Square Enix had a hell of a bad time. There are plenty of publishers that went down the money hungry route.
It's just a case of EA, they have so many talented developers and people and studios under their kind of umbrella, and the fact that they have one of the most creative, inspiring licenses at their fingertips.
It's the most popular IP in the world.
Even their really talented developers, for some reason or another, haven't been able to make it work. That potentially speaks to a larger culture at the company itself. And it's obviously we don't have windows into those rooms. You don't know what happens. But at the same time, it's difficult not to think maybe we should give it to someone else.
Yes, I mean that as a takeaway sentiment. Would you guys do you guys still have faith in EA turning something around before their 10-year deal is up, or would you rather Disney wrench it away from them and give it to someone else?
I really don't know. I'd give them the 10 years, not because they deserve it, because they've done it. just let them try it. There are, like Ewan said, there's some really great developers still working there. I want to see what Respawn's going to do. I want to see what these other games are. At least I want to know what those will be and could be before we give it up. Because, who knows? They deserve a chance at it. The people working on it, EA doesn't really deserve a chance at it. The people working on these games
Respawn
deserve
certainly do.
a chance to get the game out.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of with Josh on this. I want to see the people there. I want them to be able to actually get to do something with this license, because let's face it, it's everyone's dream to work with Star Wars. I think if somehow Respawn's game somehow doesn't come out, or there is something afterwards that gets canned, and I think Disney would be well within their rights to review at least review the situation, and potentially look maybe at first party access, because I mean we still don't know what Marvel are doing with Square Enix. I know that'll be cross platform, but again we've already seen Marvel divvying out their licenses on a case by case basis. Obviously Sony has Spider-Man, and then Square have the Avengers and other stuff. So maybe that's what Disney should be doing. Maybe they should be looking at different things things and going, you know what, you have that, and then that leads to a more heterogeneous kind of approach to their license, and potentially means that they're not investing all their eggs in one basket.
Yeah,
totally. And I think the Star Wars franchise, as an IP, is malleable enough that you could give it to everyone from a Naughty Dog to a Starbreeze to whoever, even though I don't think Starbreeze is still going.
That's a great name.
But whatever.
Starbreeze.
It is a very good name. But yeah, I mean, I think, I'm curious as to just what these games are like, mainly because I have faith in Respawn. But I can't help but wonder what, like I said, the Star Wars IP is so malleable. I would love to see what a tiny little indie dev would do with it versus the massive AAA thing. At least on the EA side, you know that the mechanics are going to be pristine. It's just that the overall, the wider stuff is bad.
You say this, but I didn't get a chance to say it earlier, but my main problem with Battlefront 2, not outside of the horrible monetization approaches, was just that it was just an alright game. It controlled solidly.
But that's all they wanted it to be.
I know, but that's a problem in itself, you know what I mean? Like, the mechanics are fine, and the levels are fine, and the story is fine, but it didn't have that vision of identity
safe.
to it. It's very safe.
Very safe. It's very, like, even though everything it does very well visually. Like, you feel like you are in Star Wars when you're playing these games, but none of it is, like, there's none of the invention that was there with LucasArts. There's none of the innovation either.
That's what I meant. It's like they have a very specific scope and they'll laser focus on it. So you can always see exactly what they're going for, and that's exactly what you'll get. And I think that there is a need for innovation, and like hopefully they can find a way to do it. So yes, let us know what you think down in the comments below if you're watching the video version, or find us on social media if you're listening, wherever you're listening. This has been the WhatCulture Gaming Podcast. I've been your host, Scott Tailford, joined by Ewan Patterson.
I'll end with who's more foolish, the fool?
Well, the fool who follows him. And Josh Brown.
Oh, God, get me out of here.
Bye.
Bye.